Un trombonista un po', sì, un fagottista.
È aprile 1962 e Genesis sono in tournée in Italia. In addition to the pizza and gelato, the band are enjoying the rare taste of fame and popularity whilst in Italy. Back in England, despite being 5 years into their playing career, Genesis are still almost unknown, and outside of a few clubs, the band have a very small fan base and very low album sales. Opinion of the press at the time was that although the band worked very hard and played well, they seemed to be lacking something, as if they needed some spark of inspiration from somewhere. That first came when the band discovered that they had actually started to sell records somewhere, firstly in Belgium and now Italy, where their nursery crime album had reached number 4 in the Italian charts. And man, this is some chart.
And the changes of no consequence will pick up the reins from nowhere, nowhere.
Accompanied by manager, roadie and almost 6th member of the band, Richard McPhail, the band hastily set off on a 2-week tour, travelling across various Italian towns and cities. The tour was originally due to start in Bolano, but it was cancelled at the last minute, and instead the band were invited to play in a town called Adria instead. Now, because the originally published schedules differed from people's memories, the first location of this Italian show has been debated amongst Italian fans for decades. That is, until someone managed to track down the actual hotel records of the place where the band stayed at in Adria and found their names listed in the hotel records, thus proving that this is where their first Italian show was. The size of the Italian audiences was far greater than anything that Genesis had seen before, with some numbering 20,000 people. Now, to put this in context, the Nursery Crime album itself had only sold 5,000 copies in the whole of the UK at that point. What drew Italian fans to Genesis and other prog bands was the dramatic, multi-segmented nature of the music, with its sense of storytelling and romance, something more in line with classical music and opera rather than blues or rock and roll. Also, the world of Genesis was steeped in European classical literature and ancient mythological imagery. And even if they couldn't understand all of the words, the Italian audience could certainly feel and connect with what the band were saying. They featured a lot in the Italian music press around this period, with the great photographer Armando Gallo capturing them then and for the rest of their career. The UK music press took note of the band's overseas success, but failed to report on Gabriel's new on-stage appearance, which seemed to change slowly throughout the tour, as night after night he began shaving a small gap in the top of his hair. The incredible response from the Italian fans gave Genesis a lifeline and renewed confidence in their future just when they needed it the most. Grazie, Italia. It was on return to the UK that Gabriel's new look was more developed, with eye makeup and an Egyptian-style necklace giving the singer a unique, otherworldly look. It was fully revealed at the Great Western Express Festival near Lincoln. Genesis appeared with fellow Charisma Records band Lindisfarne, who at the time were enjoying far more success with their crowd-pleasing McCartney-esque folk songs, and Charisma hoped that Genesis could mirror this with the release of the single Happy the Man.
Happy the man, he leads a simple life. Yeah, 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 nowhere
The single flopped, but undeterred, Charisma felt determined to remold Genesis into a lighter, more commercial outfit and brought in producer Bob Potter, who had recently worked on Lindisfarne's #1 album, Fog on the Tyne.
Someone says he's Jesus Christ, but I don't care.
If Genesis were to have been made into a more folk rock pop outfit at this time, then it's likely that they would have dusted off some of the lighter acoustic numbers that they had stockpiled over the recent years. Let's consider some of these. The song that we know today as Trick of the Tail had been played since 1969 and was thought to have been revisited during the Foxtrot rehearsals. Another Lindisfarne-styled folk piece called Grandma was also played around this time, as was Wooden Mask, an acoustic-flavoured lost epic that was known to have been recorded a year earlier. Other tracks recorded for Foxtrot at this point were Going Out to Get You, a rocky number similar to The Knife, and also the live favourite Twilight Alehouse. Banks himself has claimed that Twilight Alehouse was in fact better than some of the tracks that ended up on the final Foxtrot album, and I have to say I do agree with him. Other tracks that could have appeared on Foxtrot were Steve Hackett's future Acolyte track, The Hermit, and Tony's Further Fifth. Both were presented to the band, but neither were taken any further at that time. The end section of Acolyte's Shadow of the Hierophant, which was actually written by Mike, did get as far as being fully rehearsed by the band, but likewise didn't make it onto the final Foxtrot album. Also, parts of the I Know What I Like song were also developed during these sessions. A newspaper article from late July references that the band had in fact completed recording the new album, which begs the question, what could an early released Foxtrot have sounded like, especially if Bob Potter had created a lighter, more commercially targeted record? Perhaps this is how an early released Foxtrot could have turned out. Producer Bob Potter was not a fan of the more expansive and progressive aspects of the music, and wanting to cut the epic intro to Watcher of the Skies, he was promptly fired and replaced by yet another folk-orientated producer in David Hitchcock. Hitchcock's role, however, was not to interfere as much and really just help deliver a final product. With his recent experience with Caravan's sidelong epic 9 Feet Underground, he helped show Genesis how they could construct the emerging Suppers Ready in sections and stitching it together in the studio rather than playing it in one whole take, which is how they originally intended to approach it. In August, it finally seemed like the new album was beginning to take shape, with an NME article stating that the band were on the brink of a major breakthrough, with Gabriel claiming that with the new album, people should be prepared to accept the unacceptable, suggesting that the band had finally created the album that they always wanted. So, before we take a listen, let's head back to Italy for a refreshing drink.
Just a drink to take my sorrow. Just a drink, and you can blast tomorrow now.
Calma, ascoltate! Ben detto! Brave. La pubblicità della birra, ad esempio. Vi sembra giusto che sia rivolta soltanto agli uomini? Ingiustizia! Forse che una buona birra, la Peroni, non sappiamo gustarla anche noi donne?
Come no? Certo, io adoro festeggiare con birra Peroni.
E io al bar chiedo sempre una birra Peroni.
Sentite? Eppure a noi non si pensa. Guardate la pubblicità, tutta dedicata agli uomini, tutta civettuola e miagolante. Chiamami Peroni, sarò la tua birra. Basta, la stessa cosa si può dire con più dignità, come la direbbe una vera signora. Vuol provare lei, Presidente?
Chiamami Peroni, sarò la tua birra.
The huge opening chords to this were first played on the Italian tour in one of the echoing sports halls that the band played in. The mellotron used was purchased from King Crimson, and it provides an otherworldly feel, like we are sailing through the wake of Poseidon itself into outer space. The haunting chord sequence, perhaps the greatest in the whole Genesis catalogue, shifts keys in a way that reflects the alien's mixed emotions as he sets off on his voyage. We hear its anticipation and determination about the mission ahead, and an apprehension about the world he's about to find, and also a sadness about the one he's left behind. Then we hear Phil Collins' drum pattern signalling out like Morse code that the travelling alien has in fact landed. The title itself comes from a John Keats poem, with the overall theme being influenced by Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, a popular novel in the prog world. It's based around a group of aliens visiting Earth.
From life alone to life as one. Think not now, your journey's done.
The music and lyrics to this were written by Mike and Tony whilst in Napoli. They were inspired by both the view of the clear, star-filled night sky from their hotel and also a huge empty sports field near where they played, something that they felt looked like a deserted alien landscape where our spaceship had landed. On arriving on an empty Earth, our alien questions: have all the people been destroyed? Has life again destroyed life? Or have they themselves left the planet to play elsewhere? Steve Hackett's yearning guitar reflects the alien's contemplation, and as the song builds up towards its finale, the alien gives out one final cry, perhaps the horror of being all alone, or the glory of realizing that the empty planet is now all his. The lyrics to this much overlooked number suggest that as we all come and go through history, some things in our lives, like the carved oak tables and golden goblets, remain constant, and this song tells the story through the perspective of these objects and time itself.
A time of valor and legends born. A time when honor meant much more to a man than life, and the days knew only strife to tell right from wrong through lance and sword.
The song is noted for its chiming melody, a metallic sound that was possibly played by a guitar pick plucking the actual piano strings. The sound evokes the Baroque pop style of both the Beatles and the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, which Ryder Banks was a huge fan of. Now, whilst not the most memorable song in the band's catalogue, it does succeed in conjuring up images of a magical medieval world of knights, maidens and chivalry, the legacy of a bygone time where tradition, decency and honour were ranked above all other virtues and meant more to man than life itself. Genesis had a habit of writing lots of short pieces of music and then reusing them at later dates, and a lot of these pieces stem from the fertile days when Anthony Phillips was in the band. One such song was called The Movement, a sprawling 30-minute epic, parts of which became both Stagnation and this song here. Get 'Em Out by Friday was pieced together late in the Foxtrot recording stage when Gabriel presented a fantastic story and imaginative lyrics to the band that urgently needed music adding. Usually the band wrote the music to the songs first and then the lyrics afterwards. The track is a dark comedy about corporate greed and told as a mini opera, with the sleeve lyrics presented as stage dialogue notes with the characters' names that act them out, shown here in fantastic artwork that was originally from a French 1970s comic book called Fluide Glacial.
Represent a firm of gentlemen who recently purchased this house and all the others in the road. In the interest of humanity, we found a better place for you to go. Go, oh, go, oh.
The story centres on the evil landlord, Mr. John Pebble, who wants his tenants, the Barrow family, evicted from his property and tries to persuade them that there's a better future for them in Harlow, Newtown.
They're asking us to leave.
Peter based the song on a personal experience that he had with a real-life London landlord who exploited his tenants, a practice known as winkling, and despite Mrs. Barrow's cries, her rent is raised again, just a bit. The song fast forwards to a technological future controlled by the robots at government's central control. In order to maximise their housing space, the government decide to cut people down in size, shrinking them down so that they're shorter in height so they could fit twice as many on the same building site, and they say it's all right. Our Barrow family have their evening TV viewing interrupted by a chilling announcement.
It is my sad duty to inform you the 4-foot restriction on humanoid height.
The story is based around people's justified fears and concerns at the introduction of Soviet-style high-rise apartment blocks in the early 1970s. But rather than be boring and preachy, this social commentary is witty and imaginative with tight, dynamic playing that just about all glues together. This is another song that had a prolonged evolution, played under different titles and arrangements. When played on their Italian tour, the end section wasn't fully worked out, and instead the band used parts of another Lost Genesis epic called The Light, parts of which ended up on the LAN. The main musical sections and lyrics here are all by Steve Hackett and are based around King Canute, a Norse king who ruled over Anglo-Saxon England, with the title Canutility being a play on words of the king's name.
Singing praise him, praise him.
Singing praise him and crown him, the king was surrounded by flatterers who wrongly thought that he was powerful enough to turn back the tide and remove the waters that separated his English and Danish kingdoms. Canute sat his throne by the sea to disprove his followers that he could not in fact command the waters to retreat and that only Almighty God could do so. It's a slightly disjointed song that feels like a patchwork of different pieces of medieval tapestry sewn together. However, the actual playing is excellent, and there's a real sense of drama with the powerful mellotron strings evoking the swirling winds around the tide and a thundering bass pedal echoing the crashing rolls of the sea waves. Buried at the end of an already epic side of music, this is a somewhat forgotten song, illustrated by a story that Hackett himself has told about when he once heard the music played in a music venue. On liking the music but not recognising it, Hackett questioned the venue staff over what the actual song was, only to be astonished to learn that it was in fact his. Always reluctant to present his work to the band for fear of it being rejected, Steve Hackett had been keeping hold of this track and slowly developing it for a full year, which is astonishing to consider that it's only 2 minutes in length. The piece is a pleasant retelling of a Johann Sebastian Bach piece arranged by classical guitarist Julian Bream. Steve's own interpretation is exquisite and gives the impression of side 2 waking up to a glorious English sunshine as we enjoy this perfect aperitif to the main course that follows.
Hey, babe, your supper's waiting for you. Hey, my baby, don't you know our love is true?
Once described by Phil Collins as a bunch of bits that they just glued together, Supper's Ready started life at the Winter Gardens in Cleethorpes near Grimsby. The band had played there in July, and whilst backstage, Tony Banks drafted out the opening theme on his guitar. Banks's melody became the song's opening, subtitled Lover's Leap, and its lyrics were allegedly inspired by a bad LSD trip that Peter Gabriel and his then wife Jill once encountered. In a vague story that has been both sanitised and dramatised over time by different band members, wife Jill started to act like she was possessed, and Peter looked into her eyes and saw her face changing into a demon. On looking outside the window for help, he saw 7 shrouded monk-type figures walking across the lawn outside. For some of the more experienced viewers here, they will recognise this as classic bad acid trip territory, but from what I can gather, aside from a bit of pot, the band were not really heavy drug users at all, and probably, like most people who have experienced a bad acid trip, I suspect after this encounter they never did it again. When the song was performed in early 1973, a leaflet was given out that contained both the lyrics and a brief description of the song's story. It describes 2 lovers, presumably Adam and Eve, venturing off on a quest to cure the female of her demonic possession. They first arrive at a town where they meet a false prophet who claims that he can cure her ills with just a spoonful of miracles. He's a supersonic scientist. He's the guaranteed eternal
Sanctuary!
We will rock you, little sleigh. We will keep you snug and warm.
The children's voices heard here are actually local school kids that were just found hanging around outside the studio. They were invited in to sing the part and paid the equivalent of £5 each for their services. The Sanctuary Man has a band of merry henchmen led by Ignatian and Itzikon. The former is an Egyptian king and the latter a con artist trickster. In a dig at the more unscrupulous side of organised religion, this group of thugs are tasked with attacking those who don't buy into the Sanctuary Man's mantra, and wearing the feelings of horror on their faces, our 2 lovers watch as the henchmen are waiting for battle. After the fighting, our couple wander past scores of dead bodies, a mountain of human flesh. They find themselves on a green plateau where the Greek legend Narcissus sits looking into a pool of water, gazing at his own reflection that he has fallen in love with. The couple watched in reverence as Narcissus is turned into an angiosperm terrestrial vascular flora, or more commonly known to us as
A flower? If you go down to Willow Farm to look for butterflies, flutterbys, gutterflies, open your eyes. It's full of surprise. Everyone lies like the fox on the rocks. And the musical box.
The Willow Farm section of this track was a conscious effort by the band to prevent the Supper's Ready suite from drifting away into another version of Stagnation or Musical Box. It was a wise move, and it affords Gabriel, with the help of some in-studio helium to change his voice, arguably his most defining moment with this band.
The prince was a brick was an egg, the egg was a bird.
Fly away, you sweet little thing, they're hard on your tail.
Hadn't you heard?
They're going to change you to a human being.
Ooh la la yeah, ooh la la yeah.
He describes a magical world full of surprise, in which at the sound of a whistle, everything changes form from one character into another.
Washing, mum tiddly washing, you're all for the ball. Let me hear your lies, we'll look this up to the eye.
The Willow Farm in question is probably that featured in The Archers, a well-loved rural radio drama, whereas Gabriel's flower costume is a direct reference to a character in the children's TV programme Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men. The flower itself was known as Little Weed, and you can draw your own conclusions there, folks. The sequence ends with our lovers being turned into flower seeds, and they find themselves buried deep in the soil.
The soil, the soil, the soil, the soil.
As the real star of the show is soon to appear. Hackett's haunting guitar heralds the cry of the saintly shrouded men, blowing their trumpets and echoing the words of the Bible's book of Revelations. Each sound releases a different plague on mankind, none worse than the fearful Magog, set to bring about the end of the world as the apocalypse in 9 and 8 begins. Banks and Collins improvise around Rutherford's driving bass riff. Banks originally wanted the sequence to be entirely instrumental, but begrudgingly changed his mind when Gabriel's awesome vocal delivery describes the end of the world. As the pace intensifies, we hear the gabble ratchets. This is an ancient name given to the sound that geese make when flying overhead, when people thought that the sound was not actually geese but that of the angel Gabriel's barking hounds. The hounds hunt the souls of the dead and act as an omen that doom is on the horizon.
666 is no longer alone. He's getting out the marrow in your backbone, and the 7 trumpets blowing sweet rock and roll, gonna blow right down inside your soul.
The battle ends with Satan defeated, and the two lovers from the beginning of the song are finally returned to their original bodies. When played live, Gabriel would fly around the stage suspended by wires, as if at the end of the song he was transcending into heaven itself. And there, Adam and Eve sit at the aching feet of the Lord in their New Jerusalem, and in another biblical reference, we see an angel standing in the sun, calling on all to feast on the great supper of God, which is finally ready. With recording complete, the Foxtrot album was wrapped in another Paul Whitehead gatefold cover. And as with Trespass and Nursery Crime, the artist was given just a loose idea of some of the musical themes and some of the lyrics. He was then left alone to create not only the artwork, but also the album's title. Whitehead recreates the beach from the sea of the King Canute story, but scatters not pages from the book across it, but various characters, animals and items from the other song lyrics. Most obvious is the fox on the rocks from Willow Farm, who has cunningly disguised himself as a foxy lady and floats away from the hunters that stalk him. Fox hunting is a traditional English sport generally associated with the rich upper-class world that some of the Genesis members were born into, and its cover is thought to be a tongue-in-cheek parody of this. The dress and fox head would soon be adopted by Gabriel himself on stage. However, the original plan was to have one of the road crew dress up as the fox and sneak around the audience during the concert. The huntsmen take the form of the biblical four horsemen of the apocalypse, with death rides a pale horse being yet another biblical phrase found on this album. However, something seems to have upset our rider, who is weeping and he has a chip on his shoulder, whilst another rider is the Watcher of the Skies alien sat on what is a rather well-endowed horse. In the distance we can see the saintly shrouded men, and also the tower blocks from Get 'Em Out by Friday, whilst from Nursery Crime we have Cynthia's lawn, a sinking croquet mallet, and a floating hogweed. The cyclist is supposed to be Peter Gabriel, who came on his bike, and by all accounts poorly and wobbling about, to the album recording sessions. Whilst the submarine is supposed to represent a contemporary news story about the US Navy basing its fleet just off the UK shores, with the struggling fish and whale representing pollution. Perhaps lacking the power and compositional skill of other Genesis covers, the band have all voiced a slight disappointment with this artwork. However, it does seem to capture the dense and colourful world of the music pretty well. Foxtrot was released in September 1972, and it gave the band their first UK chart placing at an impressive number 12. The reviews of the time were largely very positive, with the music press correctly sensing that Genesis had finally achieved a level of reward and recognition that they deserved, and the Melody Maker poll at the end of that year saw the band reach the dizzy heights of the 6th brightest hope for the next year. However, arguably more than the album itself, it was Peter Gabriel's introduction and increasing use of stage costume and theatrics that helped catapult this band from relative obscurity to front-page artists. A huge UK tour followed, which saw Genesis in a Charisma Artists package, still playing support to the act Lindisfarne. However, over the course of the tour, this billing would begin to change as Genesis started to gain more popularity than their Geordie stablemates and quickly became headline bands themselves. Finally, to crown the year off, they arrived on the shore of America to begin a new chapter in their history, the New World, where they would soon be exporting their own by the pound. Foxtrot is often cited as the band's greatest work, and whilst I would not say it's my own personal favourite of theirs, there's no doubting that it is the most important album that Genesis ever released. After 5 years of hard toil, they finally achieved wide-scale commercial success, something which would take off into the stratosphere over the next 20 years. It's strange stuff, this music. The idea that something gets inside you as a teenager and never leaves. You connect with it, you quote it to girls, you hear it at funerals. It becomes part of your DNA, and it means more to you than it does to the actual people who made it. That's a very strange notion to grapple with, and in making this documentary, I found myself wondering, do the members of Genesis actually have their own Genesis? I very much doubt that the young men who made Foxtrot in 1972 would have thought that their words and music, which are sometimes quite silly and spontaneous, would be analysed half a century later. And today some of the band seem to show a bewilderment and almost embarrassment at some of the music that they made when they were just 22 years old. But then they haven't been listening to it as long as us, which has been a long, long time, hasn't it?